Hey there. Welcome to the TheSynapseStudio. Today we're going to be learning all about neurons. So let's get right into it with neurons 101. In order for our bodies to function, they need to send messages from one part to another. Those messages could be as simple as, hey, move your arm out of the way before you hit that table, or as complex as, what is this new food you are eating and should I eat it? Our nervous system does all of that by sending electrical signals through special cells called neurons. But what are neurons? How do they work? And what would happen if something went wrong with them? A neuron is a specialized cell that carries electrical and chemical messages. They are the basic building blocks of the nervous system, which also includes neuroglia, which support neurons. Together, they form tissues called gray matter and white matter, which make up both the brain and spinal cord. Individual neurons can be tiny, but in aggregate, they make up structures of the brain that can be several centimeters across. Because of their small size, it can be difficult to see neurons without a microscope, but we can learn a lot just by looking at the shape of a neuron. There are three main parts of a neuron: the cell body, dendrites, and the axon. The cell body contains the nucleus, which holds the genetic material, DNA, of the neuron. It's also responsible for keeping the neuron alive. Just like other cells, the cell body has mitochondria, which generate energy for the cell, and ribosomes, which make proteins for the cell based on instructions from the DNA. Moving outward from the cell body are the dendrites, which look kind of like branches on a tree. Unlike the smooth axon we'll talk about next, dendrites have a lot of nooks and crannies, including dendritic spines, which increase the surface area of the dendrite. This is important because the more surface area there is, the more connections a neuron can make with other neurons. These connections are called synapses. Synapses are where the neuron will receive messages in the form of chemicals called neurotransmitters. We'll talk more about that in a bit. For now, just remember that the dendrites receive messages. Finally, we get to the axon, which starts at the axon hillock, a special region near the cell body that decides whether or not to pass on the message it receives from the dendrites. If the neuron is stimulated enough, it sends an electrical signal down the length of the axon. An axon can be very long, sometimes as much as a meter. At the end of the axon are terminal axons that form synapses with other neurons. These terminal axons and the synapse they form with other neurons are similar to the dendrites, except that the dendrites connect to the cell body of the next neuron while the terminal axons connect to the dendrites of the next neuron. You may also hear them called presynaptic and postsynaptic neurons, respectively. Some axons are covered in a fatty substance called myelin, which helps insulate the axon and speeds up the electrical signal traveling down it. Myelin is made by special types of neuroglia that wrap around the axon in a spiral. Between the spirals are gaps called the nodes of Ranvier. The myelin sheath and nodes help the electrical signal jump from one spot to the next, making the signal faster. So now that we know a little bit about the structure of a neuron, let's look at how they work. Remember, neurons send and receive messages in the form of chemical signals called neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are stored in small sacs at the end of the terminal axons. When a neuron receives a strong enough signal from its dendrites, an electrical signal travels down the length of its axon towards the terminal axons. When the signal reaches the end of the neuron, it causes the sacs to release the neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters then cross the synapse and bind to receptors on the dendrite of the next neuron. Depending on the type of neuron and the neurotransmitter involved, this binding could cause the receiving neuron to fire its own electrical signal or to inhibit it so that it doesn't send a signal. In either case, this process allows neurons to communicate with each other. These messages travel throughout the body, allowing different parts to communicate with each other. For example, when you touch something hot, pain receptors in your skin send messages to neurons in your spinal cord, which then relay the message to your brain. Your brain processes this information and sends signals back through the spinal cord to your arm, telling the muscles to pull your hand away from the hot source. As you can probably tell, neurons need to send these messages quickly and efficiently. To do that, they use electrical signals. The generation of these signals involves positively and negatively charged ions. Ions are atoms that have gained or lost electrons, giving them a net electrical charge. The inside of a neuron is negatively charged compared to the outside, creating an electrical potential. This negative charge is caused by an uneven distribution of ions across the neuron cell membrane. There are more positively charged sodium ions outside the cell than inside, and there are more negatively charged proteins inside the cell than outside. When a neuron isn't sending a signal, it's called the resting potential. The neuron stays in this state until it receives a stimulus that causes a change in the membrane potential. As the neuron begins to fire, positively charged ions flow into the cell, causing the inside of the cell to become more positive. Once the signal passes, the ions are pumped back to their original places, resetting the neuron for the next signal. This brings us to the question: what happens when something goes wrong with neurons? When neurons aren't able to send signals properly, a number of things can go wrong. Some diseases cause the immune system to attack the myelin sheath, leading to problems with signal transmission. Other diseases cause the accumulation of certain proteins that lead to the death of neurons. Even exposure to toxins can damage neurons. Damage to neurons can also occur during surgery or traumatic injury. Luckily, the body has some ways of repairing damaged neurons. If the damage is to the dendrites, the neuron may be able to grow new ones. But if the damage occurs to the axon, it depends on the type of neuron and the extent of the damage. In some cases, damaged axons can repair themselves by growing new axons towards the area that needs them. In other cases, surviving axons may sprout new dendrites to compensate for those that were lost. Unfortunately, neurons in the brain don't divide after birth, so once a neuron is dead, it can't be replaced. This is why brain injuries can be so devastating. They often result in the loss of function, since the brain cannot simply replace the damaged neurons. Now that we know how neurons work, let's look at a few interesting facts about them. First, there are many different types of neurons. Sensory neurons carry messages from sensory organs to the brain. Motor neurons carry messages from the brain to the muscles and glands. Interneurons are found in the brain and spinal cord and allow different parts of the nervous system to communicate with each other. Second, there are billions of neurons in the human brain. While scientists once thought that most of these neurons were generated before birth, recent research has shown that neurogenesis, the production of new neurons, continues into adulthood. Neurogenesis was previously thought to only occur in the hippocampus, but it has also been found in other parts of the brain, too. Finally, we share around 70% of our neurons with other animals, which means that we can learn a lot about ourselves by studying neurons in other species. We hope you learned a lot today. If you did, please stay tuned for more. As always, this has been Life Noggin. Don't forget to keep on thinking.